Hey everybody, and welcome to the Ed Collab Gathering, a free day of PD in your PJs. Here we are in session 2. This is workshop number 8, and joining us today are Mollie Cura from Dublin, who is an experienced literacy consultant with over a decade of work helping schools implement or enhance their practice of balanced literacy, and also Rusul Alrubail, who's an education writer, consultant, and blogger, and she's also the Chief Education Officer of the Writing Project, an essay writing app for students. So you're in for a really great session. If you'd like to tweet along with us, or if you have questions, please use the hashtag the EdCollabGathering 8, because this is workshop number 8. Okay, over to you, Mollie.
Okay, thanks so much, Lauren. Yes, Rusul and I are so excited to be here with you. We're glad that you have tuned in. There's lots of great sessions going on. We'll talk today about kind of re-energizing our struggling learners. And in our experience, once springtime comes around, sort of the enthusiasm of a lot of our students kind of drops a bit. So Rusul and I have talked about helping readers and writers kind of develop along a continuum. So I work primarily in elementary schools, and we will, in the first few minutes, we'll talk about strategies you can use with some of those beginning readers. I think a lot of the strategies you'll find will transfer to your upper grade readers as well. Rusul works a lot with high school and university students and teachers, and I think some of the strategies that she'll present will also transfer to even your younger students. So we'll get started, and you'll walk away with several strategies that will help move your students, like we said, kind of along a continuum, but will also build their motivation. So I'm going to just share my presentation with you. And we have, we'll talk about moving readers towards comprehension. So the one thing I see a lot of in my work as a consultant is students who seem to be able to read sort of all of the words in a text, but when asked questions about these texts, they typically flounder. They have trouble kind of processing what actually happened in a text. They're just really kind of calling words. Many researchers call these students word callers, as, like I said, they're merely just calling out words as opposed to really thinking deeply about the meaning of our text. So who are our word callers? They're typically our students who, you'll notice a high discrepancy between their decoding ability and their ability to comprehend. They have a lot of trouble inferring, trouble visualizing, connecting to text, doing those sort of high impact reading strategies that I'm sure you've been talking a lot about in your reading classes this year. They have a very strong sight word base, and they're excellent decoders. So I'm sure a lot of you right now are thinking, yes, that describes Joey to a T, right? And if so, we'll talk about how to help the Joeys of your class in just a minute. The main thing that our readers are lacking is that, our word callers are lacking, is that cognitive flexibility. And so we want to, in that cognitive flexibility, is that students lack the ability to think about more than one thing in more than one way. So in the case of reading, it would be that they're focused exclusively on that letter-sound relationship. I'm sure a lot of us have had an experience with a small child when we will see a Dalmatian and say, look, a Dalmatian, and the child will say, no, that's a dog, right? Because they've learned that it's a dog. It cannot also be a Dalmatian. For some kids, that's just, sort of them going through a developmentally appropriate phase. But if that kind of lingers, we wonder, might they have some trouble with cognitive flexibility? So the good news is that we can help our students build their cognitive flexibility, and in doing that, we can increase their comprehension. So what we'll do is talk about some different learning experiences that we can work on. Some of these might sort of feel a little bit different than what we typically do in the literacy block, which is actually quite beneficial. If we want different results for our word callers, we have to provide them with different instruction. It's also a good thing that we're straying a bit from typical literacy activities. Some of these word callers may not yet love literacy, and so they might feel like if they're just doing more of the same thing, it can be a bit tedious. So we'll talk about 3 different ways to to build their flexibility. So the first is looking at through jokes and games. And we'll talk about how using doing things like talking about riddles, jokes involving puns, because to understand a pun, you have to understand that a word can mean more than one thing. So really getting to the heart of that cognitive flexibility. We'll talk about different sort of activities for helping kids visualize and make those mental images beyond sort of just draw the movie in your mind that we've all been doing this year, I'm sure. And then we'll talk about inferring and looking at ways to really break down that strategy so that we are getting to really focus in on what our word callers need when it comes to inferring. So we'll start off with some work on building better readers using jokes and games. We have some fun with puns and riddles and jokes. And the first, I'll share some jokes with you, and we'll talk about kind of how to go through them with your students. What did one ocean say to the other ocean? And this has become my sister's new favorite joke. Nothing, they just waved. So you would kind of break down that word waved with the students. So you would explain to them why the joke was funny. A lot of times when adults explain why jokes are funny, it's because the joke wasn't actually funny, right? But in this case, we really do need our students to either hear or be able to explain to us why the jokes were funny. So in that case, you talk about that word waved and how it had multiple meanings. What did Cinderella say when her photos did not show up? I guess kids would have to understand that pictures used to get like delivered in the mail. So this one might be a little bit dated as I'm saying that, but the punchline would be, someday my prince will come. So even though that word would be, those two words would be spelled differently, talk about how they can have multiple meanings. Why couldn't the pirate play cards? He was sitting on the deck, right? For older kids, you might have ones like, what's at the end of the rainbow, end of a rainbow? And the answer would be a W. So kind of understanding the end of a rainbow a little bit more could be trickier. Another riddle, you walk onto a boat and see 10 people, yet there isn't a single person on it. How is that possible? And it would be because they were all married, right? So understanding that word single. So you can do this. I would do these kind of jokes and riddles with your whole class. They build community and they're just sort of lots of fun for everyone. I wouldn't necessarily feel like you had to do a small group lesson on jokes and riddles. So we'll talk a little bit more about multiple meaning words, and we'll take a look at Poplet in just a minute. I would typically ask my kids, if I wanted them to learn multiple meaning words, I would break them into groups. This is a great activity if you have English language learners. I would definitely group your English language learners with your native English speakers so they can learn from each other. But I would give the different groups a different word that had multiple meanings, and I would ask them to come up with as many meanings as possible. So you see here, I would have given the group the word point, and it can mean main idea, period, purposeful remark, and they would kind of brainstorm lots of different meanings. Now, if they come up with dot and tip, if they're very similar, that's fine with me. I just want them to get lots and lots of meanings of that word point. You'll see here on Poplet, if you're not familiar with it, this has Mollie in all of the boxes because I came up with all of these ideas. But if you have kids working in a group, you can have them, their names would appear there, and you can then see kind of who's doing lots of the work. The next step from there would be to group the homophone, the definitions based on their meaning. So you might find that, and they can just drag these, which is the wonderful thing about Poplet. So they would kind of drag these three together and maybe make them red by easily changing the color. They feel the focus, the main idea, and purposeful remark were all sort of somewhat similar. So they would do that for all of the meanings. I would then have the students go back in and come up with different riddles, create riddles based on the multiple meaning word. Now they can do this for other classmates, for their parents, for friends. So the clues might be something like stretch your finger towards the tip of a pencil, and it would be sort of point toward the point. Let's stop working, then go knock down all of the pins in bowling. And I'll let you tweet out the answer to that one if you can figure it out. I'll tweet out the answer later today in case it's driving anybody crazy. So I would have the students go through and kind of come up with lots of different riddles that they can share with classmates. Again, getting them to see that one thing can mean multiple things, and this will transfer as they're reading text, to helping them consider not just that letter-sound relationship. Another activity that I just sort of call finding common ground. You can come up with a more clever name if you want, but if you or the kids can pick sort of 3 things in their line of vision. So a computer was in front of me, I was looking at a brochure and eating seeds and mixed fruit. So I had computer, brochure, seeds. And then you would ask the students to think of how 2 of these words are connected based on their meaning, and how they're connected based on how they're written, how they're spelled, how they sound. So you might find something like, you can make a brochure by using a computer. So that might be how they're connected, and how are they sort of related based on how they're spelling. Well, they both end with that sound, that R sound, even though the last letter isn't R, they end with that R sound. For younger students, maybe you give them pictures and they have to, again, sort of find similarities about the meaning of the pictures as well as the sound. So that would be another sort of game that you could work on with the kids. Fun with compound words. This is a great one from Kelly Cartwright. So I would give the students an image, and I would tell them that the image is a literal representation of a compound word. So that would be a butterfly. This one would be eggplant. You can also ask the kids to find compound words in their own books, and then to draw the real meaning of it. So if they found passport, they would draw an actual passport, and then then they would draw maybe a ship passing the port. But again, it's to get them to see that one thing can be represented in multiple ways, thinking about one thing in more than one way. Fun with sentences. I have a colleague who definitely does not lack cognitive flexibility. He will come up with these sentences with kind of ambiguous meaning. So the other day he said to me, Mollie saw James using binoculars. And then he asked me, who was using the binoculars? So my first thought was that I was using the binoculars and I saw James using the binoculars. But as he pointed out, or did I see James while he was using binoculars? So getting kids to see one thing in multiple ways. Groucho Marx loves things like this. He has, one morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How we got in my pajamas, I'll never know. And then I have just sort of a list of some other examples for you that we'll put the slides up on the website, and you can kind of go over those later in the weekend. So we'll talk a little bit about visualizing, which has been proven time and again to help help sort of our brains develop cognitive structures, including cognitive flexibility. The stronger our ability to visualize, the stronger our ability to process information, to create information, and most importantly for our struggling readers and our word callers to think abstractly. So we'll talk a little bit about one way that I like to do this is using manipulatives to support visualization. So you might have students, you might ask students after they've read a text once, or if they're reading a longer text, once they've read it long enough to know the characters in the setting, you can ask them to use manipulatives to depict the characters. They can then reenact scenes from the book using those manipulatives. If you're reading it to them, if it's a small group, they can actually do that while you're reading. So here, I have examples of sort of tangrams or multifix cubes. If you do have a felt board teaching younger grades, that's brilliant. But allowing students to recreate a text using a mode other than writing necessitates that they're thinking more deeply about the text to create these scenes, as they're even physically building their characters out of the multifix cubes or with the felt board. They're thinking, they're visualizing, they're inferring, and they're thinking abstractly. So you're helping them practice those skills that don't always come so easily to them. The next strategy I like to do is one that I'll just call drawing pictures or pages that the author left out. So here I'm going to try to show you an example of that. And I have a book here that is called Harry, and the bucket full of dinosaurs. Some of you might be familiar with that. So I'm going to try to get my, my document camera up and running, my toy as I like to call it. So in Harry and the Bucket Full of Dinosaurs, it's about a boy named Harry, and he finds a bucket full of dinosaurs, he finds a box full of dinosaurs, and he decides that these dinosaurs, they don't want to live in a box, they want to live in a bucket. He feels that's more appropriate. So at one point he's taking the dinosaurs out of from the box, and he's kind of fixing them up. And then on the next page we have him, he found a bucket, and he's now cleaning up the dinosaurs and letting them live in their new home in the bucket. So I might tell my students that I kind of feel like the illustrator left out a page in the book. And I was kind of thinking that the illustrator left out the part where Harry went off to kind of look for the bucket. And I might draw that picture. So I might say, here's Harry. I would tell them maybe if I was looking for a bucket, I would find one under the sink because, I don't know, I suppose that's where I would keep a bucket if I had one. And so here's Harry sort of under the sink looking for his bucket. And I would tell them that if I were the illustrator, I would have tucked that right into the page where, between the two pages where I kind of feel like the author, the illustrator, left something out. So that would be just, I don't know what you would call it, drawing the pages in between or drawing pages that the author left out. Another activity you could do with the kids is making a mind map. And so I would just sort of have the students take the text, and either as you're reading to them or after they finish reading, they might do a little mind map. So it's just really a map of sort of what's happening in the story without having to do sort of an elaborate drawing. So here's Harry. He finds a box full of toy dinosaurs. He puts them into a bucket, and so on and so forth. And I would have them just depict using words and pictures, sort of a map of the story. So those would be a couple of examples that I would do. I'm going to go back now, and we'll talk about doing a little bit of inferring with your students, and then I'll turn it over to Rusul. I don't want to take up too much more of her time. So so we have our inferring. So if I were introducing inferring to my students, I would explain to them that it's using background knowledge and personal experience in conjunction with what's in the text and in the illustrations in order to draw conclusions about what the author doesn't sort of directly tell us. Regardless of age, I would introduce inferring, usually using a picture, just because it takes sort of that one layer, that layer of reading off of it. So I might say to them, what can you tell me? I just show them a picture like this and say, what can you tell me about this picture, about this marathon runner? And they would say things like, he's ecstatic, he has just won a marathon, he must have trained really hard. Now, for adults and proficient readers, it seems quite obvious to us, those three things, those three inferences. Didn't seem like they took too much, but for our word callers, our struggling readers, it's critical to really break down exactly how we knew these things. I wouldn't do this whole class because you will have some readers for whom this is just, it's too basic. So you want to make sure you're meeting the needs of the exact students. So I might have them make a little chart and kind of go through, how did we know, how did we infer this? So I might say, I can infer he's just won the marathon because the blue ribbon is still intact. I can infer he's ecstatic using facial expressions and body language. So to tell them exactly how I made these inferences in a way that's transferable to other pictures or text, right? We can always use the image. We can always use facial expressions, body language, background knowledge in order to make an inference. And then lastly, I have another activity for a book called The 100 Dresses, which if you haven't read, it's so beautiful and I highly suggest it. Again, this would be a bit tedious for your more proficient readers. So I would suggest just pulling a small group of kids. And so what I'll do now is kind of show you what I might do. And I might print off either use the actual text or print off a passage from the text, and I would read through the text and point out to the students as I'm reading what kind of inferences I'm making and how I'm making them. So the two girls reached the classroom after the doors had been closed. The children were reciting in unison the Gettysburg Address, for that was the way Miss Mason always began the sessions. Peggy and Maddie slipped into their seats just as the class was saying the last lines. So I would model for them before I had them go off and try this. The two girls reached the classroom after the doors had been closed. So I might say to them that after the doors had been closed is making me think that Peggy and Maddie are late because, well, I don't generally close the doors after sort of the 8:15 bell rings, but right, that might be something that a teacher would do. The doors are closed, so the two girls must be late. The children were reciting in unison the Gettysburg Address. And I might say, there's some tricky words in here, reciting and unison, and I might kind of muddle through how I would make an inference about reciting could mean. I can kind of infer that it might mean saying the Gettysburg Address, because the Gettysburg Address is a speech, and that's sort of what people do. They kind of repeat speeches. In unison, I might notice that that prefix there. I might tell them that the kids were probably saying it together. I know that's the way we would say the Pledge of Allegiance. Really, and I would kind of go through that in any way that whatever you do to make an inference, I would have the kids do the same thing, and then you can give them another passage that they can model. So that is, I'll post just in a minute a couple of some resources that I would use, that I use to create this presentation, and some resources that might be helpful for you as well. So we have Kelly Cartwright's book on word callers, strategies that work, and a couple of different websites. And then I would love for you to keep in touch with me, LinkedIn, Twitter. I have a website. You can sign up for a monthly newsletter. So I hope you've learned sort of a handful of strategies that will really help you turn those word callers or those struggling readers into great comprehenders. And Rusul, I'll turn it over to you now, and you can get us started. Is this a question here, Lauren, that I see up here?
Yes. There's
great.
a question for you. You want to answer that now?
Yes. I don't know what everybody can see, but it says, would I suggest these strategies for ELL? Seems like it could support their early English skills, and definitely. I do live in Europe, and I work a lot with English language learners, particularly the strategies for those jokes, riddles, puns, things like that would be fantastic. Oftentimes our English language learners, their sort of true personalities do get a little bit lost, and so because they're so desperately trying to learn English. And so to give them that outlet to sort of let them show their funny side would be great. And then the visualizing strategies, kind of cross languages for sure. With the visualizing strategies, you could certainly have them do that from a text in their native language as well, because we're really just kind of building strategies that will then transfer to their own, transfer to English, to the language that they're learning. So that's that. Lauren, do we want to turn it over to Rusul? Are there any other questions, or?
We did have another question about can you start these activities in kindergarten, or is that too young?
I think you could definitely start some of them in kindergarten. You could sort of play around with some of the jokes. I find a lot of kindergartners have really great senses of humor, so you could definitely do some of that work. And I'm sure the kindergarten teachers out there are doing those visualizing and inferring strategies anyways, so this just sort of gives them another couple of ways to do that. In kindergarten, I hate to label kids so early as struggling readers or word callers. So even if you're unsure of are they actually struggling readers or are they just developing kindergartners, but the activities will definitely work for a lot of your kindergarten students.
All right, so let's head on over to Rusul and continue our learning.
Great.
So hi everybody, my name is Rusul, and I'm going to also discuss some strategies to use for reading and writing when it comes to our struggling learners. Really, there are strategies that we could use with all learners, but they do usually help to engage struggling learners with reading and writing. I think Mollie's presentation was really insightful, and it's really focused on K to I guess 2 or younger learners. And my presentation is going to be a little bit more for if you're teaching high school students. I think this might be useful for you, but again, you might kind of see some overlap. So let's get started. I have gone out and not used the traditional PowerPoint method. I will be using a Medium presentation, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Okay. Okay, so can everyone see my presentation? Yes. Okay, great. Let's hide this. So again, we're talking about struggling learners when it comes to reading and writing. I think the goal of this presentation, I'm going to go over a few reading strategies and to kind of get started on helping students understand complex text. So we're talking about fiction and informational text, or also known as nonfiction. I'm also going to provide some activities to help students scaffold learning scaffold reading. So I find that a lot of my struggling learners kind of look at one article or one story and they feel really overwhelmed with reading the entire story, and they end up not reading the text altogether. So I think there are some strategies that we can implement to help them go over text bit by bit so that they can end up reading it and understanding it as well. I'm also going to go over a few writing strategies towards the end to help them understand how to critically analyze the text that they're reading and engage with it critically through literary analysis or critical thinking and some modes of argumentation. I won't get into too much of argumentation, but more literary analysis. So my method is, and you'll find throughout this presentation, is first we activate students' learning. So what is their past background, what is their past knowledge, what do they already know? Then we start with reading and the process of scaffolding. From that we move on to discuss. So discussing what we've read, trying to engage them in the topic and the subject, seeing how they can kind of connect this topic to their real world and bring their real world experience into the discussion. And lastly is the respond part, which is the writing. So for me, that's kind of the continuum that we go through, is the activate, read, discuss, and respond. And from that, I see a lot of learning happening with students. So the first part that I want to focus on is engaging students in complex text. And I think this is one of the hardest parts, is when you're in high school and you're teaching, for example, grade 12 or grade 10, and you introduce an article to students and they have a hard time reading it and understanding it. My first strategy is to focus on identifying fiction and nonfiction. So what is the difference between fiction and what is the difference between nonfiction? A lot of students have a hard time grasping that this short story is not real. That kind of gets them a little bit confused. Often they disengage when they don't know if the story is real or unreal. So one way to do this is to actually go through it with them and create charts, diagrams, or labels, provide them with kind of fun activities for you to be able to distinguish the two concepts together. So fiction, nonfiction, and really label it. So we have nonfiction, it's real. This is something that is probably researched. There is a lot of information about this when you look up other articles. There's maybe a table of content. And fiction is story. It has characters, there's settings, and there's a problem and solution, and you go through the elements of fiction as well. I think a lot of students kind of maybe even go through like autobiographical fiction, and if this is a story based on somebody else's life, or did this happen to the author himself or herself. So again, I think helping students distinguish between the two genres will allow them to kind of engage with the text. Another thing is, so this also relates, is that first you distinguish between fiction and nonfiction, what they're actually reading. And then when you dig deep into the text, there's a lot of terminology and comprehension that you want to get students to understand. And that is kind of something that could be a roadblock for students if they find a word that they don't understand, or you ask them to locate a metaphor in a story and they don't understand what a metaphor is. It often becomes a huge roadblock, and students become disengaged with reading. So focusing on vocabulary, terminology can help to kind of help students to decipher what they mean, and also to engage them in it. I find that when I tell my students, what's a metaphor? And we talk about it, and we give examples of metaphor, they really start engaging and connecting a metaphor to their real life, and the discussions can often be really fun from there. So when we talk about fiction versus nonfiction, we can also talk about genres. So what is fiction? There are so many different types of genres when it comes to fiction. There's like comedy, romance, poetry, and you can brainstorm with the students on how to kind of, on what kind of genres they're interested in. For example, what's your favorite genre? Is it mystery? Is it sci-fi, adventure? And when it comes to nonfiction, what do you read that's nonfiction? So maybe they read sports, maybe they read articles about music, gossip columns. So helping kind of students go through the genres, I think, also can help with comprehension. And so going through that, I think, would help to kind of understand where they're coming from and what the text is actually going to present to them. So you're looking at a diagram here of, it's a snapshot of the writing project, and here we talk about the different elements of fiction. So what is fiction composed of? We have characters, we have settings, we have themes. What are some examples of themes? And then you brainstorm together with students. And so for example, can irony be a theme? And you talk about that together based on the story that you're going to read. Or can a minor setting be still a major setting? Can that be considered a major setting in the story? A lot of students want to write about something like a character or setting or a theme, but they don't understand how to kind of convey that meaning in their essays or in their paragraphs. So kind of helping them go through the literary devices itself, even helping them understand the elemental definitions. So what's a literary device? What's a thesis statement when it comes to a work of fiction, nonfiction? And going through that can kind of take a lot of the pressure off from having them to go and look it up themselves. And this also works with English language learners to kind of, terminology and comprehension is going through it before we read the text helps them understand. And then while you're reading the text, kind of revising what you learned before, reactivate that kind of knowledge also helps to engage them. A lot of the times that when we are doing, sorry, I just bounced back and forth. So there are some fun activities that you could do with students to help them remember vocabulary words. A lot of the times we can use social media to do this. You can create, maybe a lot of teachers have a class account. with Twitter, and they can create funny definitions of stuff that they learned. For example, a metaphor, an example of a metaphor, or an example of irony. I have one student, when I asked them to create their own metaphor, I still remember it to this day. She said, boys are like ATM machines. They give you money whenever you want, or something of the like. It was really, really funny. And so the boys were just like, no, how is that possible? We're not ATM machines. And then, so this kind of not only helped them learn what a metaphor is, but they started engaging with it and relating it to how they see it in their real life. And so walking away from the classroom, they know what a metaphor is, and they can identify it in real life as well. One strategy I really like is have students create their own memes using literary strategies or metaphors or irony, etc. Whatever vocabulary that you want them to understand. I think helping them or going through the activity of creating their own memes, it can be really fun and engaging, and as well as kind of using something that's relevant to students so that they could learn and be engaged with it. If you click on the link I provided, you could see that, oh, I don't know if you can have that after the presentation, but I could tweet that out for that outfit. And she wrote about creating memes in the classroom, and I think it's really, really a fun idea. So I found this quote really interesting. Struggling readers often have a difficult time transferring old knowledge to new situations. And I think that's why we need to help students see how what they already know connects to what they're going to learn in the future. So I would spend the first 10 to 15 minutes of class to engage readers with the subject of the text that they're about to read. And there are some activities that we could do to do that. So, but before that, before even designing the reading activities, I would consider the following. So think about first your students' background knowledge when it comes to the subject. What do they already know? Would they be interested in such a topic? What would they like to know about the topic? And a lot of these questions can be answered just by asking students what they think. So tomorrow we're going to read the story, and the main subject is this. How much do we know about this topic? And ask them like by a show of hand, how many people have already read something that's similar, or have you experienced this? And I think this kind of helps you gauge the relevancy of the topic when it comes to students and their engagement level. And a lot of the struggling learners become disengaged when the topic is irrelevant to them. And so this helps kind of make that connection happen all over again. So some pre-reading activities, for me, when it comes to fiction, it would be nice to show a clip to students that relates to the work that you're going to read. So maybe a YouTube video or something that you found on Vimeo or something like that, and show it to them and ask them what they think about it. If you don't want to have an open discussion about it, maybe ask them to record their thoughts and then afterwards share it with everybody. Another way is to get them to share a photograph or an image, and that relates to what you're going to read, and ask them what their initial thoughts are. So I remember, this was a while back, but I remember we used a photograph of students just basically sitting and looking intently at somebody, but we can't tell who it was. And so we said, write a kind of a short paragraph about who do you think these students are listening to. And it's so interesting to hear the stories that students come up with. I had a student who said, I think this is an important day for his students. Nelson Mandela attended and they were listening to his keynote. I was baffled by just her ideas that she came up with just seeing that image. For informational text or nonfiction, share a tweet, maybe something related to the reading. A lot of articles that we read are directly related to current events or something that touches us every day. And so having that out maybe on Facebook or Twitter can kind of help to get them engaged. And one of my most the excellent strategies that I would use is create a debate in the classroom about the topic that we're going to discuss. So a lot of the informational topics that we talk about, again, there is a pros and cons, and have students kind of host a debate. Again, activating students' prior knowledge. Think about things like, what is one thing you want to learn about? When did this event happen? If you were able to describe something in 2 sentences, what would they be? And again, that helps them to kind of relate back to their own experiences and how can they engage with the text that's going to come up. When it comes to reading and scaffolding, you could go through several steps. So first, read the text aloud with students, just like Mollie did, and kind of go through it one by one, revisit the vocabulary words. And a really good strategy is chunking. So that's one of the effective strategies to scaffold reading. Again, I'll tweet that link out later, but there is a really good kind of lesson plan by Facing History on how to use chunking when it comes to reading. And I think a lot of it's really useful. So I'm going to tweet that out when I'm finished. So ways to help struggling writing is, one of the main thing is to help them understand that what is considered real writing. Right now, we often don't think of blogging, tweeting, Facebook status as real writing, but it is. So I think helping them understand that, writing about pop culture, social media, current news, hot topic debates, this is all real writing. Sorry, I'm rushing because I think I'm running out of time, but so again, there's a lot of research here that you could see. English language arts teachers are they're the least likely to see that digital tools having a negative impact on students' writing, and I think this is a fabulous step in helping students understand and seeing how we can use digital tools to improve our writing. And I'm focusing on digital tools here because this is a really strong way of helping our struggling learners to engage in writing. One thing that I would use, I've used blogging as a mode of reflection for peer editing and collaboration. Digital storytelling is a great way to have students create storyboards first, outlining, and then using other forms of multimedia, so incorporating music in their stories. And storytelling with Instagram is amazing for my students. So you look at the picture, pick a picture, go through it, put a filter on it, and then create a caption. Ask students what it is about that picture that made it so special. Help them understand how to use hashtagging, categorizing, and then tweet it out, or Instagram it out to their followers. So that's another way of helping them be engaged. So lastly, I'm just briefly running through things here. I had an example of getting students to analyze, and for example, you choose a topic, you get Romeo and Juliet. What about Juliet? Her character suggests maturity. How do we see her innocence? And you just ask them questions. Why is this important? Juliet's innocence, is pure heart, is important because it relates to love. So what? So I used this example here is being used by the writing project, and it basically walks students through analytical writing. Lastly, here is some sample student writing, the perception of beauty. So I had them choose topics that they kind of care about and talk about, and this is through blogging. They talked about politics, they talk about gender expectations. This one here, I gave them a prompt, so social media, what is pros and cons of social media? and then they blogged about it. This one here is a chosen topic of their own, so how to procrastinate, why, so what. So help them understand, going from description to analysis is ask them, why is this important? So what? What are we trying to show here? And the last thing here is an example of one of my students' digital storytelling. I can tweet that out for you all as well so that you can see how well he did. I'm so proud of him. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop talking. But thank you so much for having me. I'm going to tweet out some of the links right now. And thank you for listening.
Thank you to both Mollie and Rusul for sharing the wealth of resources for struggling readers and writers. Everybody, make sure you look for those links on Twitter. Check the hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering, #8. And stick around. I'll show you what's coming up next. In stream or session 3, we have workshop number 10 with Chris Lehman. He has recorded some information about the EdCollab 2016-17 Professional Learning Preview. Super excited about that. In workshop 11, we have Mary Howard and Linda Holt talking about maximizing deep thinking and reflection through independent reading and read aloud. Also in workshop number 12, Amy Rousman and Shanna Carnes are going to talk about choice as the keystone in secondary English classes. And finally, in workshop 13, you can hang out with Rebecca Rofo-Tepper and Rochelle Vallon talking about game-based teaching strategies for the student-centered classroom.
Great, they all sound great.
We'll see you there.